Hi everybody, this is Bruce with Abowski Studio. I want to thank you for joining me today. And if you're new to the channel, thank you very much for checking me out. Check out the rest of the videos I have on my channel. And I want to thank everybody for hanging in there for the, I think it's been about 3 weeks since I posted a video. The last video I posted was from my iPad and it was pretty rough. I didn't have a lot of features enabled on a tablet device to do proper editing. Sorry about that. Just want to let people know what was going on, which was I had some family issues with health and everything. Everyone's doing fine, and now I'm ready to get back to some painting and work on part 2 of the hay bales. If you haven't seen part 1, check that out. And also exciting, of course, is I have my new computer, and was able to put my software that I got a while back to run on, supposedly ran on my Vista computer. It didn't run right. Pinnacle, some video editing, so now I can do a little better editing, voiceover, and that's what I'm going to experiment with this piece, is do some real-time painting and do some voiceover, because sometimes apparently in the past when I've tried to paint and talk at the same time, a couple things happen. You lose your train of thought because you're trying to paint, and talking can be a little tricky, but also the sound wasn't picking up sometimes on the iPad, and I apologize for that. So hopefully this will fix and remedy that problem, and we'll continue with some more interesting content and be able to do the voiceover and explain things in more detail as I see myself painting, and there's might be little things popping in my head about, oh, and watch out for this, and this brush stroke works good for this, that sort of thing. So let's get started, and thank you for joining.
Okay, right here I'm going to be starting to lay out the palette I will be using for the painting. I'm going to be using titanium white. I'm squeezing out right there, and the whole palette will go down to each color here. Then we have the ivory black, and I'm putting some out on the palette here. Next we had the cadmium red light. So this whole painting is going to be a limited palette, obviously. If you saw part 1, just going over this part for people that haven't seen part 1, which I suggest you see. And here I'm laying out ultramarine blue. And the last color I'll be laying out between the two there will be cadmium yellow pale. The thing with a limited palette is you have to understand is that you're not going to be able to mix every single color approximations, and you just have to kind of go with that. I tend to like to use a limited palette quite often enough to just experiment, see what my colors will do for a limited amount. I think that could facilitate, if you're painting plein air, for speed of painting and that sort of thing, and just for knowledge. Now what I'm going to be doing is putting out some medium to use for this session of the painting, and I'm going to be using, as you can see, the refined linseed oil by Gamblin. And what I'm going to be doing in the future is playing around with some, I used to use liquid a lot, and I bought some more of that I'm going to be using in future paintings, along with the Winsor Newton liquid impasto. So this painting, I like how I have, first you can see obviously the brushes, some of the brushes I'll be using, not too many huge brushes. I prefer more of a softer haired brush. The hog bristle, not my favorite. I kind of might use them to scrub in paint, be a little rough on them because they're kind of a tough hair. But normally I like softer brushes. So here I am blocking in the sky and putting basically second layers over the whole painting. This is where I will start to cut around the trees with the sky color. And that brush you see there is a Princeton Umbria. I believe I mentioned those in a previous video. I kind of really like how they work. And also recently I bought some Rosemary and Company brushes. Tons of good reviews on YouTube about those. I have not tried them yet, but I'm really looking forward to that. So I can see sometimes how I hold my brush. I don't always hold it with the tip like perpendicular to the canvas. I like to be as parallel to the canvas a lot of times to scumble the paint on, move the paint around. So experiment with that yourself to create different effects. And just gonna let you watch me paint for a little bit here. I don't want to over talk the video. And this is something new I'm trying, so with this new software, and I hope you really kind of get more out of the videos by doing this method. And if not, if you prefer different my previous videos, let me know that. Um, this format will probably be more. Well, I'll probably do it for plein air too, to experiment, to let you know my thought process, because sometimes just painting and trying to talk can be a little difficult, as we as artists all know. So again, just cutting around. And before I started this painting, I didn't mix up too many piles, but for the snow I'll be doing in the foreground, and the sky, and the highlights on the hay bales, the highlights on the snow, I pre-mixed 3 piles of color to facilitate just kind of sticking my brush in what I needed and painting without having to stop and mix, obviously. It can be always tricky to know how much paint to mix up, but better to have a little too much than enough, so you don't have to stop and redetermine what the color was. That's why I mentioned, as in a previous video, to save some color called your mother color, so that you know what to match to. And that's one advantage of the limited palette, is that you don't have to think too much because there's only so many colors to choose from. So I find that very useful, especially when you're beginning painting. Multiple reasons, cost of paint, that sort of thing, and also you might as well start right out of the gate learning what the colors can do and switch up your limited palettes and try different reds and blues and yellows. Now some parts of this video will be time-lapsed and shot from different angles, close up, and as you see here, so that I hope that gives you range to view my working procedure. We'll see how the iPad picks up the detail when it's up close. Sometimes when I'm mixing a lighter tone into a mid-tone or something like that, or I try to not over blend the edges where they meet. I might even quite often mix up another color of the two and strike that in there with the brush to create a blend. Excuse me. So just the sky was not super sunny, and had this hazy effect, milky kind of effect to the sky. So that's what I'm trying to achieve here in the painting. Again, still cutting around the tree shapes. And what I'll do in the next session is, because you'll see later on that I haven't really blended too much on the distant trees, but I'll try to integrate those into the sky color a little bit, so they ghost back, so to speak, just a bit, to help give more depth to the painting. I myself am always struggling sometimes with how much, my edges and what edges I want to highlight, because I think we as artists tend to, when you're working on a part of the painting, you tend to focus on that part of the painting, and your edges might get a little too crisp. You got to step back enough to look at the painting as a whole, especially what your focal point is, which in my case is the three bales will stay the most defined in the painting is my goal. And it's really going to be fun when I put the colors in those distant shadows there in the middle ground there. I really like too how the snow is kind of up against those hay bales like that, kind of give you a sense that maybe there's a windy day and the drift of snow. Now we get a little time lapse here. Just wanted to show you some parts in real time. Excuse me. You can see how on the left cloud area, the left corner of the painting there in the sky, you'll watch me as I pick up that cloud and going behind the tree there, so that's not stopping at a given element in the painting, because you want to have something behind. I'm sorry for those glitches in the beginning, from the beginning of the painting. I'm not sure what's going on there. Still learning the editing process. I think I might have gaps here in the framing of my video. Sorry about that. So here I am working on the bales up close here a little bit. Mixing up some color. And I might dance around just a little bit in different parts here sometimes, but in terms of having it focused on one part of the painting, and then you don't see my brush for a little bit, is because I might have a color on the brush that I might use in other parts of the painting while I have it on the brush. So I apologize if there might be some gaps in any movement going on. Here I am laying in the snow, and I obviously made the snow not pure white. Used some milky version, so to speak, of ultramarine blue and white. So I have some place to put the highlights. If you make the snow too white and you go to put your light on there, then you don't see it. So it doesn't have the impact that it should, so you want to be careful of that. Like I was mentioning earlier, I also have some, I'm going to be trying some liquid impasto medium that is coming in the mail. Heard about it on a YouTube channel. This Andrew Tischler guy out of Australia, and it's supposed to thicken up the paint, give you a chance to really build up some thickness without using just straight paint. So it'll extend the life of the paint. So I'm looking forward to experimenting with that. And I can see there where I just dabbed on some paint. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll mix up an approximation of color, dab it on there, take an educated guess, or cover it up an area. So different things I do. I don't really use the same method in every painting. I want to try to learn a little bit in each piece, try to approach the painting like I've never painted it before. Like, I'm afraid I may not get the result I want. I want to be a little scared when I approach a painting, so that I don't feel comfortable, and it gives me for me the ability to learn, so I don't repeat myself over and over and over again. I try to do that quite often in paintings, or even in parts of paintings of subjects I paint a lot of. Maybe with very familiar subjects, I might just do what would you call it? Pick an idea. Like, okay, for this painting, I want to work on really thick brush strokes to describe the form, and that's going to be part of the goal of the painting also. So those are ways to shake up a bit on a subject that you tend to do a lot. So here I'm cutting around the hay bales. Trying to get a little thick paint, not impasto thick, but so if you look up close, you'll see strokes of paint. Sometimes what I'll do too is I might paint the dark shadow of the hay bale first and then cut around with the light tones, and that really kind of gives a chiseled look, like you're cutting out the edge of that foreground shape, and that could be a nice effect to experiment with. Again, I want to mention that let me know in the comments if you appreciate this kind of aspect to how to shoot my videos. I think it, for me personally, if I was watching someone's video, I would find this very useful. I'm going back to the palette quite a bit to pick up that paint that I mixed when I first began for the initial value of the snow. And then I'll just mix in a little bit of this paint or a little bit of that paint to modify that original color. Sometimes I'll put on strokes of paint and I don't get too carried away with blending right off. I might put on quite a few of these strokes of paint that I want to suggest whatever element. Then I might step back and look and see which ones I want to retain for an effect of texture, or rather than overblend. So here I am, kind of time lapse again, just blocking in second coat on the snow and sunlight. I'm really liking the shadows on these two bales there. They're very interesting to look at. They're not the same. That's something you want to watch out for. And there I am painting in the kind of electric blue in the shadows of snow. I like that effect. Kind of pops that foreground, middle ground tree behind that bale on the right. Here I'm doing some painting in the shadows, second coat. Really like the composition, and if I remember right, this is a square, obviously. Yeah. I was hoping the iPad would catch more detail in this section. Hopefully you'll be able to see a little bit of what I'm doing. I just love when you get the right tone of color on something and it just helps the painting sing. That's really kind of like icing on the cake. Like it quite a bit. Now this is where I'm going to be doing some nuance of color in as the plane of the snow rises up vertical against the bale. It's catching more light from the sky, so it's going to be a little lighter. So those little details of reflected light is important to be aware of. And you probably saw or clips of the photo from part one, or in this one off to the side, the reference photo. It's really become just suggested. I mean, picture's okay. It's not the greatest, but I kind of know what to look for in certain parts of the painting, and other parts I might pump up the volume in terms of color or contrast anyway to make it a more interesting painting. So it's almost like the photo is a sketch. And even sometimes I might have a bigger brush out for certain parts of the painting, which I still tend to favor the more mid-sized to smaller brushes. If they lay in a big area, obviously, depends on the proportions of canvas. Bigger canvases, I'm not gonna sit there all day and with a 1/4-inch brush and put in paint, but um, for me, I like that stroke of paint to be relative to the proportion of the elements you're painting in the canvas. I think you can still be painterly and loose, yet and still retain that effect, which I like, of painterly realism is what I like to refer to it as. Okay, and this is what I was talking about earlier, where I'm probably on the third bale, putting in some items too. So I know it's probably a little distracting for you, but just hang in there. And we'll get back to painting the overall painting. Yep, I'm working on the other bale. So, and the snow and everything. Now you can see in this session I'm wearing gloves. I don't always wear gloves, but I've been wanting to experiment to do that more, to really keep the solvents off my hands. I'm not too messy a painter anyway, but just to get used to that, having that protection. And it's a little awkward at first because, I don't have that. Even though they look like grippy kind of gloves, I dropped the palette knife on my sweatpants, and because I thought I had it, gripped in my hand. Stuff happens, but especially to get used to wearing some kind of hand protection, especially if you're painting in cooler weather, and you want to get used to what that feels like, the grip on the brush and all that. So shortly we should be coming back to the overall painting. Just gonna hang in there. It's gonna be fun doing those groups of trees in the background, because the challenge is going to be keeping them subtle yet have enough information in there to suggest what they are. So always learning curve. Here I am putting in the lightest lights that I mixed up, which is just cadmium red light with white. Just wanted a hint of pink in there, so the effects I like quite a bit. You see I'm putting those chunks of paint down. Pick up more paint, put it down. I try not to overbrush the paint out of the brush. A couple reasons. One, depending on the size of your brush you're using, you're just gonna move all the paint up into the end of the brush hairs and get near the furl of the brush, so cleaning will be a little more difficult. But also, it's nicer when you just mix up the paint on your palette and pick it up. Like I always think of it when I go to my canvas with the thick paint, that I'm buttering my bread. Just imagine when you're having a nice meal and you butter a piece of bread, that kind of nice creamy feel. Then you can manipulate what you put it on. Sometimes I'll also use a palette knife to apply the paint and then move it around the brush once it's on there. kind of saves on the life of your brushes that way. And the hay bales look a little skewed out right there, and that's only because of the camera angle in relation to the edges of the canvas. It just looks awkward. Okay. I'm anxious too to get back to my urban paintings. I really like mixing up the subject matter. Sometimes maybe if I do too many landscapes in a row or something like that, I want to make sure my drawing skills aren't getting compromised. So I like to make sure to stay in practice, so to speak. And I think the techniques you might do for different subjects lend themselves to a wider vocabulary as a painter. That one you probably can see the pinkness of that color. It's really like it. Putting some kind of random little dimples in the snow. Want to show some real in the picture. There was more, but you know, you gotta edit your pictures if you're working from reference photographs, even from life. You gotta edit. Not everything's going to be presented in the painting. You're making a painting, so have to remember that as an artist. It really feels like that snow is wrapped like really in the crevices of those bales. I'm really liking that. Did some effects of the snow catching certain little areas. Helps break up that shadow area a bit. And if you put on too much paint, I just buff it off with a paper towel. And I'll work back over that later, but if you really need to clean it off, then you can take a very little bit of clean terps on your brush and wipe that on there, wipe it off on paper towel. Wipe it off again, one stroke. Don't keep going back and forth, you'll spread that tone around and kill the shadow. So just wipe with the terps in your brush, paper towel. Wipe with the terps in your brush, paper towel. And then give a final buff with the paper towel to get that excess terp off, even though it's going to evaporate quickly depending on if you're outside. So just working on, because it's a smaller shadow shape, it's going to get washed out a little bit from the light around it in terms of darkness, so that's why that value is a little lighter than what you see in the hay bales in certain parts. Hay bale shadows. And just waiting for full screen here shortly. Now here I am putting in some detail in the hay bales now. I find that to get a sense of realism, like if you really want a quick sense of how real, so to speak, something's gonna look in terms of form, I always make sure, obviously, to have my light tone, mid tone, and a dark. Those three, and then you can nuance in between. So this is what I'm trying to do. That concept with the shadow here in the hay bale. Put some dark, then I'll put some light, and then eventually it'll look three-dimensional. And painting these hay bales, this will be working on next few minutes here, and bringing those up quite a bit, because that'll help me gauge the detail and everything else, because these hay bales are my focal point, so I want to keep that in mind. And I'm thinking of painters sometimes when I paint like certain areas I'm working on. I might think of Van Gogh, or I might think of the Impressionists, and so on. And in this particular piece, when I'm painting these bales, you start thinking of the Impressionists and the strokes of color against one another, and you'll see that coming up in a few minutes with the highlights on the bales, the sun. I tend to favor round brushes that are rounds and filberts. I just like the way they work with paint. I mean, I have gobs of brushes like all other artists out there, but we always have our favorites. Was that one time you need that special one, you want to have it. It's interesting when you see the painting zoomed in close. If you look at that hay bale on the right, into the upper right quadrant there, that little area looks like a beautiful little abstract painting right there in its own right. Very interesting. Those are the things you want to do sometimes when you're working on your paintings, is to kind of pay attention rather than just slap paint on. Maybe there's areas you want to preserve through the whole painting. Let it guide you, you know. I'm happiest when I'm painting a painting that I'm only maybe 75% in control. That gives me some room to be surprised, or, you know, that sort of thing. And sometimes I'll tend to paint stuff that's beyond me, which I think is important to learn as an artist. Beyond me, meaning in terms of technique I have to represent it. And I've worked on paintings, they sat around for a couple years in the studio, and then finally I work on them because I can paint myself out of that corner that I got into the couple years before. So now when I work on the final layer, that's when I'll start scumbling some differences on the paint, subtle changes. Here I am thinking of the Impressionists as I'm putting in these little dabs, those slashes of color. It's really fun doing that. I might even, next time I work on it is when I'll really get some thick tones in here and there. Now here I'm just showing detail of how I'm going to be handling some of the background trees. Just kind of scrubbing the paint on. Letting some of the original scumble show through. Dancing around the edges of the middle ground shape there of that tree. That's going to be a tree later. Suggesting some tree trunks here and there. Now, if you're very careful with a slightly bigger brush for this type of work, you're just using the edge, and you can do that if you load up the paint and then with a light touch. And don't, when you're cutting across that wet paint that I'm doing right there, don't go back and forth too crazy. Keep loading up your brush to bring that if you want a dark tone across. And those little bits of light and dark gives more interest and depth in the painting. Here I am suggesting tree branches, and I'll do more of those later, but looking really like those pieces of snow in the shadows. Otherwise it would have been just a bunch of boring trees. So you're kind of leading the eye back in the painting that way. Here I am putting cad red light pretty strong right in there. Don't forget, you can always, if you've got something too chromatic, you can always kill it down with the complement or darker color. So if you're not sure if that's going to be too much, put it on a little heavy. You can always tone it down. You can always gray it down. But it's harder to have it some other ways. You just got to experiment. Try not to get a color too light, because if you want to darken it, then it's very hard. You're better off just wiping off that area and repainting it. Better to go a little too dark and lighten it up. So I hope this method that I'm doing here with this particular video is not too dull for you guys. I think it's almost like gives you more information, especially if you're a beginner painter. I can talk more about things that relate to painting while you're watching me paint, and I'm talking about the painting I'm working on, but also about in general, just information about being an artist and that sort of thing. So now I'm just going to experiment here, testing waters myself. I'm going to stop the voice recording here and then pick up again. Okay, I was just testing. Make sure I know how to do this video editing stuff. Thank you for bearing with me. Okay, so just working on some adjustments over there to the snow. I think this painting's really going to be a real nice one. I'm liking it. And, see how I went over a little bit with that tree trunk right there? Well, I just picked up some more of the snow paint, picked up a load of it, and just cut off that bottom part. So, it's the easiest way to do it. You can even set up your brushes in a way that you're using, of course, a set for your lights and set for your darks. I always say I'm going to do that, then I get lazy. So I tend to not do that. I do it sometimes, but definitely not as much. I think that would facilitate working on your painting in terms of speed, being more efficient with your time while you're painting. Okay, here I am now. I'm going to be cutting in some of the light. They're almost like they're birch tree saplings back there in the reference photo. So, and it's not actually white paint I'm using. It's white mixed with some of that reddish tone that I blocked in with, so that it is harmonious with that background. Just a few select lens pulled out. Then when you step back, I never try to finish one area too much. I do some where it starts really read and excite me, and then I leave it until I get other parts of the painting pulled up to speed. So I keep everything kind of excuse me, flowing together at equal parts. I just feel, because could be parts of this section you see me do right here that later on I won't have to do anything to, because as I get other areas brought up to finish, it reads correctly. So I'll just let it be for a while until I work up other. Now I'm working on the evergreen trees back there, cutting around that tree shape, which I'm really hope I'm going to nail that later when I work on it, because that's going to be a nice little feature right over the bale. Excuse me. And I'm close enough to the reference photo trees. I'm not trying to be exact.
Well, this concludes part 2 of the hay bales. I want to thank you for watching. And for all you new subscribers, thank you very much for signing on. And don't forget to visit my Etsy shop, Abowski Studio. Check out my book on Amazon.com under Bruce Abowski. And I'm going to just pan in for a few details. A lot of work. I'm getting into a lot of detail strokes now. So it's coming out pretty nice. I like it. It's going to be a lot of work in the background trees to not compete with the hay bales. Again, thank you for checking out my videos, and until next session.